You're standing in the middle of an ancient forest. Towering trees stretch endlessly around you, their gnarled roots weaving across the mossy ground like veins of some great sleeping giant. A beam of sunlight filters through the canopy, illuminating tiny motes of dust that dance like fairies in the air. The forest is alive, not just with birdsong or rustles of leaves, but with something deeper, something that hums just below your awareness. It might just be the presence of a dryad, one of the ancient spirits of the forest. Hi, I'm Kriss, and welcome to the Lorekeepers library. Today we're diving into the world of Dryads, the mysterious tree nymphs who have watched over forests of myth and legend for centuries. These aren't just the green thumb's answers to fairies. They're powerful, mysterious beings with stories that will make you think twice about picking up an axe in the woods. And trust me, their tales are deeply rooted in history as trees themselves. And so, let's go exploring. And before we do, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also share these stories with your friends. That way we can keep the tradition of folklore storytelling alive. So what exactly is a dryad? Picture them as nature's quiet sentience, beautiful ethereal beings who are much like a part of the tree as the leaves or the roots. The word dryad comes from the Greek drys, meaning oak. Originally, dryads were specifically tied to oak trees, which the Greeks considered sacred and powerful, often associated with Zeus, the king of the gods. But over time, the term expanded to include spirits of all trees, from towering pines to delicate willows. Dryads are a type of nymph, which in Greek mythology means they refer to minor deities tied to nature. Now, when I say minor, it doesn't mean they weren't insignificant. They just weren't up there in Mount Olympus swapping gossip with Athena or throwing lightning bolts like Zeus. They were more like the quiet caretakers of the natural world, each bound to their tree, their essence intertwined with its life. And here's where it gets interesting. Dryads weren't just casual tree enthusiasts. Their lives were tied directly to the tree. If their tree survived, or thrived, so did they. But if it was cut down, burnt, or it died, the dryad would perish along with it. So imagine being so connected to your home that literally you couldn't survive without it. It's a concept that feels so foreign in the modern world, where we can move from apartment to apartment, house to house without second thought. It is this unique connection that makes dryads both powerful and also vulnerable. On one hand, they're the ultimate guardians of their forest, deeply attuned to the health and balance of their environment. On the other, they're entirely at the mercy of human activity. A careless woodcutter could end a dryad's life without even knowing she existed. It is a stark reminder of the delicate relationship between humans and nature, a theme that resonates as much today as it did in ancient times. And while we're on the topic of connection to their trees, we can talk about another form of dryad, the hamadryad. These are a special subgroup of dryad whose fates were more tightly bound to a specific tree. Unlike regular dryads, who theoretically could move between trees in the forest, hamadryads had their one tree, and it was their only tree. And they didn't just live with the tree, they were the tree, in a sense. So cutting down a hamadryad's tree wasn't just an act of destruction, it was essentially murder. And dryads weren't all doom and gloom though. In Greek art and literature, they are often depicted as shy, playful, and deeply tied to the beauty and mystery of the natural world. Could you imagine a creature with flowing hair that might resemble cascading vines or leafy tendrils, with their skin that could shimmer like bark of a birch tree or glow faintly green like new leaves in spring? Some stories even describe them as blending seamlessly into their surroundings, making them nearly invisible to anyone who didn't know how to look for them. And now here's the thing about dryads. They weren't just passive spirits, hanging out in trees and hoping humans didn't mess things up. They had agency. They could bless those who respected their forests and curse those who didn't. If you stumbled into their grove and didn't make an offering, like a handful of honey, a cupful of wine, they might protect you. They might even guide you safely through the woods and even grant you good fortune. But if you came with an axe and a bad attitude, well, let's just say the forest has a way of dealing with trespassers, and it's not always pretty. Ultimately, Dryads were more than just mythical beings. They were a way for ancient people to personify the life and soul of the forest, a reminder that trees weren't just resources to be exploited, but living entities worthy of respect. And honestly, in a world where forests are still being cut down at alarming rates, maybe we could do with a little more Dryad wisdom in our life. The stories they tell of Dryads are woven into some more fascinating and cautionary tales in mythology, embodying the delicate relationship between humanity and the natural world. These stories aren't just ancient bedtime tales, they're brimming with drama, lessons, and a touch of cosmic justice. Now let's take the story of Erysichthon, a classic example of what happens when you mess with the sacred. Erysichthon was a Thalassian king whose arrogance was matched only by his greed. One day, in desperation to collect more wood for his palace, he decided to cut down an enormous oak tree in the grove sacred to Demeter, the goddess of harvest. This tree was a home to a hamadryad, a dryad so deeply connected to her tree that harming it was tantamount to harming her. As the axe bit into the bark, the hamadryad cried out in pain. Her wails reached the ears of Demeter herself, and the goddess was furious, and rightly so, and decided to teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. She cursed Erysichthon with insatiable hunger. No matter how much he ate, he was never satisfied. He devoured everything in sight, his food, his wealth, and even his own family's livelihood. And in some versions of the tale, his hunger became so unbearable he ended up consuming his family's flesh and even his own. And so the moral? Disrespect nature, and nature has a way of biting back, sometimes literally. But not all Dryad stories are about punishment. Some tales highlight their benevolence and the symbolic relationships they shared with humans who respected their forests. Ancient farmers, for instance, would often leave offerings at the base of trees thought to house Dryads. These offerings, often honey, milk, and small trinkets, were an act of gratitude, asking for the Dryad's blessings over the land. Now, one lesser-known story involves a young hunter named Alcides, who unfortunately once got lost in a dense forest. As night fell, the woods became eerie and oppressive, and he feared he would never find his way out. Desperate, he stumbled upon a massive willow tree, and remembering the tales from his grandmother, offered his knife as a gift to the Dryads who he believed to live within him. The next morning, Alcides woke to find a path of glowing moss leading him safely out the forest. And whether it was the coincidence or the work of a Dryad, he never hunted in that forest again and made offerings every spring to that willow. And then there's the tale of Philyra, a Dryad whose story is more poignant than dramatic. Philyra was known for her incredible beauty and artistry, crafting delicate perfumes from the flowers in her grove. And one day she caught the attention of Kronos, the Titan. Now, depending on the version of the myth, their union was either consensual or not, a grim reminder of how even divine beings could be subjected to power imbalances. And from their union, Philyra bore Chiron, the wise and noble centaur. However, she was so distressed by her son's half-human, half-horse appearance that she prayed to the gods to transform her into something else entirely, so she'll never attract attention to herself ever again. And so her wish was granted, and from this she became a linden tree. Her spirit was tied forever to its graceful, swaying branches. Dryads also appear as protectors of their groves, defending them from human and divine interference alike. In one myth, the god Apollo fell in love with a Dryad named Daphne. Now, Daphne wasn't interested in becoming one of Apollo's conquests, and she fled from him. And just as he was about to catch her, she prayed to her father, the river god Peneus, to save her. In an act of desperation, she was transformed into a laurel tree. While she avoided Apollo's grasp, she had lost her freedom in the process, becoming forever rooted to one spot. It was a bittersweet twist. However, Apollo declared the laurel sacred and adorned himself with its leaves to honor her. Now, these are just a taste of the mythology that's been passed down through the ages, and these stories I shall visit again in future episodes. But stories of Dryads aren't just tied to ancient Greece. And next we shall travel the world and time to find dryad-like creatures that have inspired many folklore stories from around the world. Across cultures, trees have been seen more than just plants. They're homes, guardians, and bridges to the divine. So let's take a little world tour of these tree spirits, shall we? Let's start in the misty hills of Ireland and Scotland, where the Celts believed the power of the fairy trees. The lone hawthorns, oak or ash trees were said to hound the Inossi. These are the fairy folk. And cutting one down was a big mistake. Bad luck was almost guaranteed to follow. You'd have failed crops, sick livestock, and even suffer personal tragedy. People left these trees untouched, even if they stood inconveniently in the middle of fields. And then there's also the green ladies of Scottish folklore, gentle, shy spirits tied to the trees and forests. And unlike the temperamental fairies, the green ladies were often protective, but peaceful. They would guide lost travellers back to safety, or simply watch over their groves, ensuring harmony. It's a softer, more nurturing take on the Dryad myth. And now, in the dense, dark forests of Eastern Europe, the Leshy roams. A forest spirit and protector of trees. The Leshy isn't tied to one specific tree like a dryad, but watches over an entire forest. They can be mischievous, leaving travellers astray with laughter and tricks. But their primary role is clear: protect the woods. If you respected the woods, they might leave you alone, or might help you find your way. And if not, well, let's just say getting lost was the least of your worries. And then there are the Rusalki. These are spirits more associated with water, but sometimes tied to trees that are near rivers and lakes, like willow trees. Rusalki embody a more tragic side of tree spirits. They are often linked to women who have died prematurely or tragically. Their stories blur the line between beauty, sorrow, and danger, making them a fascinating counterpart to the more serene Dryads. And now let's go further afield. Let's head to Japan, where you will find the Kodama spirit. Unlike the ongoing Dryads of Greek lore, Kodama are quite quiet, elusive beings who embody the soul of their tree. You'll often see sacred trees marked with shimiawe, straw ropes that signify the tree's divine nature. Cutting down one of these trees is said to be terrible misfortune. You can think of it as a cosmic do not disturb sign. Kodama are ingrained in Japanese culture, and they've even made way into modern storytelling. Studio Ghibli fans might recognise the little forest spirits from Princess Mononoke. Their rattling heads and eerie presence are a nod to these ancient beliefs. And now let's continue our journey. We're heading to West Africa, to the Oroko spirits. In Yoruba culture, the Oroko tree is thought to house powerful spirits. The Oroko spirits is said to grant blessings or curses depending on how it is treated, and locals leave offerings at the base of the tree hoping to appease the spirit and receive its favour. This deep reverence for trees echoes the role of Dryads in Greek mythology, a connection between humans and the natural world, where the tree spirits act as a sort of mediator. In the Philippines, the balata tree is home to the tree spirits known as the Duato or Cantos. These beings are strikingly similar to Dryads. They protect their groves and punish those who harm them. Balata trees are considered sacred, and locals will leave offerings of food, flowers, and candles at their base. But here's the twist. Balata trees are also seen as portals to the spirit world. Tales of people disappearing or encounters strange beings near these trees are common, and that reinforces their mystical reputation. And so if you've ever stood beneath the sprawling roots of a balata tree, you'll understand why they're easy to believe something otherworldly might be watching. And yes, this is definitely something I shall be revisiting in a future episode. So Dryad myths, wherever they are a mix of reverence, caution, and a deep-seated awareness of humanity's impact on the natural world. And it's these stories that remind us that trees and forests aren't just scenery, they're vital living parts of our ecosystem. And so these stories show the idea of tree spirits are universal, whether it's the shy Kodama of Japan, or the mischievous Leshy of Slavic folklore, or the protective Duata of the Philippines. Humanity has long recognized the sacredness of trees, and they are just more than wood and leaves. They're living connections to something greater, something worth respecting. And maybe, just maybe, we've always known that cutting down a tree means cutting away a little bit of magic. Now, Dryads may have originated in the ancient world, but their presence has quietly persisted through the ages and evolved to find places in our modern imagination. They're no longer just relics of forgotten lore. They've grown into powerful symbolisms of environmentalism, conservation, and our increasingly complicated relationship with nature. So let's take a closer look at how these mystical tree spirits continue to thrive in today's world. Dryads have become an environmental symbol in the time when deforestation, climate change, and habitat destruction dominates the headlines. Dryads have become emblematic of the nature's fragility and also its resilience. Their deep connection to trees, where the fate of the Dryad is tied to the life of their tree, often is a poignant metaphor for the consequences of environmental harm. Dryads remind us of the inherent value of trees, not just as a resource, but as living beings that sustain ecosystems and that even hold spiritual significance. Environmental movements have adopted imagery of Dryads as protectors of forests, emphasizing the idea that cutting down a tree isn't just an act of destruction, it's the act of violence against a living, breathing entity. Even some environmental campaigns have even embraced the idea of modern Dryads. Activists who chain themselves to trees or live in forests to prevent deforestation have often referred to as modern-day Dryads, embodying the spirit of guardianship and resistance. But it's not just from activism or environmentalism. Dryads have found a second life in popular culture. They've been reimagined, modernized, and adapted, but their core traits as guardians of the forest and bound to their trees remain the same. In fantasy novels, Dryads often appear as mysterious allies or protectors of enchanted forests. Works like the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis feature a Dryad-like character, such as the wood nymphs who embody the trees of Narnia. And more contemporary series such as Percy Jackson and the Olympians by Rick Riordan have introduced Dryads to a younger generation, framing them as relatable and sometimes sassy guardians of the natural world. And Dryad-like figures appear frequently in fantasy films and shows. You can think of the Ents in Lord of the Rings. While technically not Dryads, they capture the same essence of tree spirits. They're ancient, wise, and deeply connected to the forest. And as previously said, in animated films like Studio Ghibli's Princess Mononoke, they touched on similar themes of nature's guardianships, drawing from the same well of mythology. And Dryads have even made staples in fantasy games, from Elder Scrolls series to World of Warcraft and even Dungeons & Dragons. They are often depicted as powerful allies who protect forests and wield nature-based magic. Their appearance, though varied, consistently emphasize their roles as defenders of the environment and symbols of balance. And while traditional Dryads are rooted in ancient forests, sudden modern interpretations imagine what Dryads would be like in today's urbanized world. Could there be a Dryad in a lone tree growing from the cracks of the sidewalk, or a spirit bound to a park tree surrounded by towering skyscrapers? This idea has sparked creative interpretations in urban fantasy stories, where Dryads attempt to adapt to the shrinking natural spaces. These urban Dryads are often portrayed as guardians of the last remnants of green in cities, fiercely protective of their small patches of nature and lamenting humanity's encroachment. It is a powerful way to explore themes of environmental loss and resilience in the modern setting. And Dryads have also found a place in modern spiritual practices. In neo-paganism, Wiccan, and other earth-based spiritual paths, Dryads are sometimes invoked as spirits of the forest. Practitioners might honor them through rituals, offerings, or meditation, and treat trees as sacred beings with their own consciousness. And though there's often the cliche sounding of tree hugging, it's actually rooted in this very idea. The belief that trees are alive in ways that go beyond biology, that they have an energy or even souls, and that by hugging a tree or spending time in the forest or observing nature has become its own form of meditation. And so Dryads in this context serve as a way of personifying that connection and making it easy to engage with the natural world on a spiritual level. Now, Dryads in the modern world are more than just mythical beings. They are a reminder of what we stand to lose if we don't protect our forests and natural spaces. So whether they're inspiring environmentalists, or appear in our favourite stories, or quietly remind us of the old magic in the world's forests, Dryads continue to root themselves in our collective imagination. And so next time you pass by a tree, whether it's a towering oak in the forest or a scrappy sapling in a city park, take a moment. Listen to the rustle of leaves, feel the texture of the bark. Maybe, just maybe, you'll catch a glimpse of the Dryad watching over it. And so, a final tale before we part ways. Let me share one last story. It's a tale that lingers in the mind like the scent of rain on the forest floor. This story comes from the Greek island of Crete, a land steeped in myth and magic where olive trees have grown for millennia and whispers of Dryads still echo among the groves. Once, long ago, a young farmer named Callias inherited a small plot of land from his father. Among the rocky soil stood a single ancient oak, its branches gnarled and heavy with age. The villagers warned Callias that the tree was sacred. It was home to a Dryad named Eurydice. She was said to be gentle but fiercely protective of her tree. Callias, eager to expand his field, ignored their warnings. He reasoned that one tree wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of his harvest. Axe in hand, he approached the oak and swung at its trunk. The first blow sent a shiver through the air, and a low, mournful cry echoed from the forest. That night, Callias dreamt of a woman, her hair like cascading leaves and eyes deep as the earth. She stood before him, her face streaked with tears. "Why do you harm what gives you life?" she asked. "The tree shelters your soil, holds the water, and offers shade to your crops. To destroy it is to destroy yourself." And with that, Callias awoke in a cold sweat. Shaken, he abandoned his axe and began to care for the oak instead. And over time, the tree flourished, and so did his fields. His crops grew richer, his soil remained fertile, and the other farmers soon followed his example, leaving their sacred trees untouched. Now Callias lived a long and prosperous life, and when he passed, the villagers swore they saw the oak shed a single leaf in mourning. The tale of Callias and Eurydice is a simple one, but its message is still profound. Our connection to nature is reciprocal. When we harm it, we harm ourselves, but when we care for it, it nurtures us in return. And with that, our journey into the world of Dryads comes to an end, at least for today. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Lorekeepers library, and share this episode with friends who might also enjoy these stories. After all, myths like this only survive when we keep telling them, passing them from one listener to the next, like whispers through the leaves. And so until next time, keep exploring the world with wonder.